Good day, everybody. I'm Don Wycliff, and we're here today with three at the moment, Black Domers essayists from the decade of the 1990s. I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves in a few moments, but first I want to give the floor to my partner and friend in this endeavor, David.
Well, Don, thank you. And I'm David Krashna. I'm one of the co-editors, very proudly, of Black Domers, African-American students at Notre Dame in their own words. And we have some excellent essayists, contributors from that book, and I'm excited to have each of you here, and welcome and thank you for participating.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And why don't we begin with brief introductions with Iris, please. Name, whatever.
Name, rank, serial number.
Ranks, right.
Okay. Well, I'm Iris Outlaw. I am a graduate of the graduate program at the University of Notre Dame. I graduated in 1990 with a master's in science administration, which is now not for profit. I am blessed. I joined the university that following fall in 91. And so I served for 28 years as the Director of Multicultural Student Programs and Services, formerly known as Minority Student Affairs or Multicultural Student Affairs, and have seen a lot as a graduate student, as well as an administrator, staff, and instructor. I did teach a few classes on campus. So, so honored to be on here with two of my former students. And I'm not going to tell anything else.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Hello, Rochelle Valsaint. My maiden name is Stewart. That's what Rochelle Stewart is, who I was when I was at Notre Dame. Graduated in 1995. Owen, I don't have any brothers. I'm one of three girls, and Owen is my brother, and my classmate. I am from New Orleans and have lived in Atlanta pretty much since graduation in 1995, and love it here.
Thank you. And Owen.
Hey, my name is Owen Smith, and I graduated class of 1995. I too am my only child. Rochelle is like my sister. Iris was like my mom and aunts and cousin and aunts, just all around, just helped me get through. She would hold Essence magazines and Jet magazines for me, just so I could look at us. And I graduated from Notre Dame and I moved to Chicago, lived there for 5 years. And then from there, I moved to Los Angeles, and I've been living out here ever since. I live in Santa Monica with my wife and 2 children, and we're doing all right. Just trying to avoid these fires, and but yeah.
Great. So we've been joined by our fourth essayist, and I'll pitch it to him and ask him to introduce himself with class year and basic stuff.
All right. My name is Azikiwe Chandler, and I am class of 1994, Bachelor of Architecture. I am now living in Kuwait as a middle school math teacher. I'm into international education, and I'm not sure what else I should be saying beyond that.
Well, that's good enough for now. We'll come back to you in a minute.
All right.
But I wanted to ask Owen again.
Hey.
Regarding the lines in your essay about, I experienced a lot of the classic fish out of water scenarios at Notre Dame. I had a white girl from Idaho tell me she never saw a black person before, and good luck finding any black magazines or hair care products on campus. How did you react to that?
It was shocking because I was born in the Bahamas and I was raised in Prince George's County, Maryland. So I grew up with white people being like the minority in my purview, So this was the first time I was outnumbered, like grossly outnumbered. Like, this is crazy. But I think what helped is I went to a program the summer before freshman year that kind of, where I got my feet wet. It was called Aetna Belfour. It was sponsored by those two companies. This is where I met Rochelle and a lot of beautiful people. I met the first love of my life in that summer program. And so I had people to go through it with. So I wasn't, oh, my wife just heard me say that. Baby, I'm with you. You won, baby. My first love is who I met at. Come say hi. Well, first love. I'm in trouble now. Y'all got me in trouble. But anywho, so, you know, I had people to go through it with me, and like, she lived like 20 minutes away from campus. So I wasn't stranded. I felt I was, but it forced me to, you know, talk to other people and, you know, use my resources. I'm so in the doghouse right now. I'm hearing a bunch of noise back there. And so it in a weird way, it forced me to grow outside of my, cause I was just gonna like keep my head down and just try to like barrel through.
Sure.
But those experiences, you know, forced me to reach out to other people. Like, hey man, where'd you get that? Or you know, hey, catch the bus where? To the mall. Like, we learned about with the bus schedule, and we would go as groups and go together in groups, and we would, you know, get all the things that we had to get. And we kind of made it work and had people send stuff from home. And I know Rochelle used to do people's hair, and I started cutting people's hair. And so we ended up forming this community. It was small, but, you know, it was, you know, so it was one of those things where in a way it kind of helped us, you know, get to know each other and become closer. So I think and I kind of like look at things from like the positive space. Like, I knew when I was going to Notre Dame kind of what I was getting into. So it wasn't like, I didn't feel tricked. I wasn't like, you know, I wasn't like, I wasn't completely fighting, you know, what it was. But to experience it in real time, it was like, you know, it was like you train for it. Like, my whole life, my mom would tell me, you know, it's not like this everywhere else. But once I was in it, I was like, oh wow, this is something else. But
yeah. Rochelle, your reaction to finding yourself in that environment at Notre Dame, not predominantly, virtually all white. How was it for you?
Yeah, I wasn't trained for it. So I love how Owen was like, I flew from New Orleans. I had never left Louisiana and had no idea it was all white. I still describe Notre Dame as my whitest experience ever, figuratively and literally, because of the snow as well. So I was completely a fish out of water. And I'm from New Orleans, but I grew up Baptist and went to an all public Black high school. And my experience with white people were minimum because New Orleans is self-segregated. And so I grew up in a Black community, completely surrounded by Black people. And going to Notre Dame was shocking. And still, I can't fathom how different it was from the life I led before Notre Dame, and trying to bridge what I grew up being and being in that environment was nothing short of pretty much a miracle. I remember when it snowed the first time up to my knees, and I was in the president of the university's freshman seminar class, and he planned to have class that day. And I literally called and was like, what do you mean? You're not closing the school down? Like, what? And he said no. And I was like, well, you won't see me in class today. So that's the kind of person I came there, just trying to bridge who I am with where I was. And it was totally fish out of water. But Owen's right. Like, we created a community, and as we were surrounded by white people, but I still barely saw them. My community was us. So I was doing hair. My mom owned a beauty salon. I was with my crew from the Aetna Balfour program. My roommate was white, but thankfully she had experienced Black people because she was from South Bend and went to a public school. So when I put a perm in my hair the first time and it smelled in the room and white stuff's all in my hair, and she had no clue what it was about, but she was good about it. So to this day, we get together once a year with our kids and exchange those experiences, because that's how she was my foray into the beauty of white people and bridging what I thought and saw on TV and who they were, putting a face and a person with that. So
That's interesting. Zeke,
Yes.
talk about it from your perspective.
So for me, so we're all talking about being fish out of water. And I would say that most definitely I felt that way. Not only because as an African-American, I'm coming to the University of Notre Dame, and really I had no idea. I really didn't know what to expect. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My name is Azikiwe because I was born into an Afrocentric collective that my parents were a part of called the East. And so the first 6-7 years of my life, I attended a school called the Huru Sasa, and all of my teachers had names like, Baba Yusuf, Mama Manisha. When we said that we didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning, we came into a gym that was painted with murals of Marcus Garvey, Frederick Douglass, etc. We pledged the red, black, and green. Now, when I moved from Brooklyn to Charleston, South Carolina, that's when I had my first culture shock. Because of course, I didn't have classmates with names like Mansour and Kenjufu and Asada, like my classmates in Brooklyn. Now my teachers couldn't pronounce my name. And, I got into a fight the very first day of school because a white boy says, "Look, there's a river in Africa." And he points at me and starts laughing. The teacher says nothing. So I punch him in the face and I get sent home with a pink slip. And this was the kind of stuff that kept happening for the first few weeks of school. And then I got to a point where it was just like, okay, I got to stop fighting because I'm going to get in trouble and I don't want to keep putting my parents through all of this. And so I started internalizing some things. And my parents realized that they had to replace what we were missing from Brooklyn. And so while we were learning about, Benjamin Franklin and George Washington in school, we came home and learned about, George Washington Carver and Benjamin Banneker. And so that was the kind of upbringing I had. And it was around that time that I started growing dreadlocks because it was taking pride in being of African descent. And I wanted that outward manifestation of the inward pride that I had. So when I got to Notre Dame, we're talking 1989. So this is before dreadlocks became what they are now. It was still that sense of consciousness, that sense of wanting to connect with African spirituality, with our African roots, etc. And so I was the only one on campus with locks. I had a big green coat with a mural with a picture of Bob Marley on the back. I'm walking around campus smelling like oil and listening to reggae music and looking for that. And of course, that was nowhere to be found. So not only was I a fish out of water in terms of, being a Black man at Notre Dame, but even amongst the Black folks at Notre Dame, there wasn't a whole lot. Wasn't a whole lot of that, but I do agree with, with in terms of finding our community, because, we did find other African Americans and my crew, Chris and Kurt and Ben, they were a little bit older than you guys, but still there were people that are probably, like, if we had all gone to Howard, I probably wouldn't have known those cats because we just came from different worlds. But being at Notre Dame, we found each other and became family and took care of each other that way. And I found it interesting what you were saying about your white roommate and the fact that you could see that love, Rochelle, because I can't say that I ever felt that at Notre Dame from white folks. And I remember specifically being in Italy, studying in Rome, and thinking that white folks and Black folks just couldn't really be family because there was no love for me there. Like, I was struggling in Rome. And I just remember feeling like if I was at Notre Dame, my man Fred Tumbar, if he saw me struggling the way these white folks see me struggling, we gonna be struggling together. If he got food, I got food. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I felt it was. But I was there And, you know, I'm trying to keep up with them. You know, every day somebody yells, cappuccino break, and we all run from the studio and run down the street and buy cappuccino. Somebody says, gelato break, we all run and buy gelato. But Notre Dame paid for everything except for our food. So, you know, these kids had their parents' credit cards. I had the money I'd made that summer. And, you know, after a couple of months, I'm like, I ain't got no money for cappuccino or gelato. I ain't got no money for food. You know, things were rough. And so there was a point that I actually had a sign up in the kitchen next to my desk, next to my drafting table. It said, "Cento modi con riso," which translates to 100 ways with rice. And the reason it was up there is because I was trying to figure out how to eat. And I just figured out all these different things you can do with rice. If you put butter and sugar on the rice in the morning, and it was sweet like oatmeal, so you could eat it that way. And then at nighttime, you could, you know, throw some salt and pepper on it, and then, you know, gave it a little bit of spice. But, you know, my classmates knew this, and I don't feel like, you know, every now and then one would say, oh, come on out to dinner with us. But I didn't feel that love. But what I will say is that Rome, for me, was similar to what Mecca was for Malcolm X, in the sense that though I didn't feel that love from my white classmates, there were Italians and Greeks and Yugoslavians and Africans too, who took me in Rome and treated me like family, who really took care of me. But it was a particular friend of mine. She was actually from Greece, and she was studying in Rome while I was studying in Rome as well. And I remember this like it was yesterday. I had just come back from Naples. And when we were in Rome, you know, there was always something to eat. I could buy a can of tomatoes for 50 cents, and there could always be some spaghetti. So I could always eat something. But whenever we left Rome and we did some traveling, we basically ate well. I would eat well if the hotel that we were staying in offered breakfast and dinner. Sometimes they only offered breakfast. In Naples, they only offered breakfast. So I kid you not, we all went to breakfast. And when my classmates left, I went back to the cafeteria and took all of the bread and jelly and cream cheese and stuffed it in my bag so that I could have something for lunch and dinner. When I came back from Naples, I remember she was asking me, and I just met her maybe a week or two before that. She said, how was Naples? And, you know, I was like, I don't know what I told her. But she said, well, can you meet me for lunch tomorrow? And I was like, well, I would be at the studio. She says, let's meet at the Campo dei Fiori, which is an open air market. We're walking around and she's asking me all these questions and we get into this big debate. I think she says, I'm trying to tell her that I don't eat maiale, which is the word for pork. But I said miele, which is the word for honey. And so she keeps saying, well, why don't you eat? And I said, well, you know, it's the dirtiest animal. People get sick from it. She's like, no, it's the fruit of the earth. It's good for you. But meanwhile, we're going back and forth and she's saying, do you like rice? I'm like, yeah, sure. And she throws some rice in the bag. And, you know, she said, you like broccoli? She buys broccoli. Next thing I know, we've been talking. I'm not paying attention. She's got 2 big bags of groceries and she gives them to me. I'm thinking she's asking me to hold them for her while she goes to the restroom. And she says, okay, I'll see you in a couple of days. And I'm like, what's going on? She said, well, you need food, right? And I said, yeah. She said, well, here you go. And I was dumbfounded. I was like, why? She said, well, I just have a feeling that if the situation were reversed, you would have done the same for me. And that to me right there was like, okay, so it's not white and black folks, it's white folks in the States. That was my experience up until that point.
That's very powerful. Very Iris, you come at this from a completely different direction. Talk a little bit about what you found. Were you a fish out of water or what?
Well, you know, it's interesting because growing up 27 miles from Notre Dame, and it was an all-male school at the time that I graduated from college, so it wasn't on the radar. But being a high-achieving student, my high school counselor told me that I should be looking to clerical school, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And I was like, nope, I'm gonna be a pediatrician. But I ended up going to IU, Indiana University, which is a state school, got a wonderful education there, but and got accepted into med school. I didn't know that my vocation actually was really working with youth because I didn't want to teach. I knew that was like off the market for me because at the time that I came along, that's what women were going into education. That wasn't, and I'm a first gen. So, you know, didn't have a lot of experience, but, you know, because I had cousins who went to college, they kind of helped steer me. But as my essay states about how I got to Notre Dame, my husband was working there. And program. Which was interesting though, is that Notre Dame, can you hear me? Okay. Notre Dame, for me, was not a fish out of water. That first class I took was a capstone class. That was the most diverse class I'd ever been in. I mean, I walked in and saw so many Black people. I thought I had, as far as I was concerned, I might as well have been in an HBCU. But that was a very diverse program as well. So that was my very first class. I happened to have a partial relationship with one of the co-instructors. So it was very good. But as I moved through and took other classes, they weren't as diverse. So some of my issues actually came with professors. And even when they team taught, a male professor, not to be sexist or anything, but looking at my work gave me outstanding grades, but the female counterpart would downgrade it. It wasn't this good, it wasn't that. And I talking to other folks, I found out that she was really racist. And so how do you navigate that then? And I think because I had been out and worked, I learned how to work the system and knew that, okay, I know you from another realm, or I know people who know you. So if you don't step up your game and work with us in an equal environment, a playing field in the classroom, I can share that information, that network, and really do some, I would hate to say real damage, but I think I would have people seeing another side of you that you may not exhibit when you're out navigating the Michiana community. So that gave me some leverage. But also too, like I said, being older, I didn't have a problem with addressing or talking to professors. And, at times challenging them, or at least letting them know that I expect them, I'm paying your salary, although I really wasn't, because I only had to pay for 2 classes. That's another story. But because of the fact that I was, leaving or contributing to their livelihood, that I expected from them. So you're not going to just gloss over me in the classroom. You're going to let my voice be heard. And really, I think that kind of helped. Because there were many of us in the classroom, we were able to make our voices heard and not to be ignored. And then some of the professors ended up becoming colleagues once I started working in Notre Dame. So.
Right. David.
Yes, I sent questions to each of you, and I think we would be remiss if we did not speak to the current students and maybe to the future Black students. And each of you have unique backgrounds. You're very successful in your life at this time. You know what the young Black alumni put together, at least as far as their petition, some very startling grievances. I'd like each of you to spend a few moments, but I have to say, let's see, Owen, I love your Daffy Duck story. You gotta do that, buddy. But there's something underlying that, right? There's a stereotype there, and you might want to speak to that in terms of answering the 4 questions that I posed to each of you. And Rochelle, I'm going to start with you. You say, for example, at Notre Dame, you felt, quote unquote, quote, on display. Could you talk a little bit about that? And then if you would just address 1 or 2 of the questions I sent to you.
Yes. Culturally, I could say that I felt like I talked different. There was a diversity in terms of Black students as well. So coming from New Orleans, Zeke mentions his roommate, Fred Tombar, who is from New Orleans as well. But as a Black woman, I felt like I had a different sense or level of confidence. How I spoke was different. I just talked about I did hair. So I felt like I was coming from a background that just displayed different somehow. And that played out in class. My degree is communications. And one of my other classmates, Jeremy Rawl, there were only 2 of us in upper level classes by junior year. And the professor would ask him, if I wasn't in class, where was I? So the notion of like, you know, there's two of us, and then if one of us doesn't show up, the other one knows where the other one is first. Like that in itself is a thing. And then, and then, you know, all the other ways that I walked around campus, and I, you know, I have to speak to this notion of, you know, the athletes were so separate from us as students. And as a Black woman, I left there with confidence issues, if you will, because I came in very sassy, very confident, used to dealing with young men. And I got to Notre Dame and there was not one guy trying to holler at me, to the point where I had to read a couple of them and be like, look, I might not want you, but some Black girl wants you and y'all won't even look at us. So it was that going on within our community. And then outside of us, you know, I grew up in self-segregated New Orleans. And as I said, like white people were in my periphery still, but I walked through the dorm with my friend and classmate, Tanya Callahan, whose mom was a professor at the time. And we had a rector in one of the men dorms approach us, and for whatever reason, he was frustrated. We were in there and he hit us with the "you people." And I had never heard the "you," like I knew what it meant, but I had never experienced it. So it was my first experience of somebody talking to me derogatory, and I couldn't even process it. Like I said nothing, I stood there in shock, and she had to address it because she had grown up in Amherst, Massachusetts. As I said, her mom was a professor at Notre Dame. And she complained to the university, et cetera. So there were instances where I just talked about how my roommate was loving, but when I left out of there, out of my room and out of my community, I just felt as I walked across that very white campus with snow on the ground and nothing but white people around me, that I was on display. And I feel like students today are feeling the same way. And I know they have the, you know, there's technology. I feel the students chosen are different. They are coming from those private school atmospheres, but they feel no less on display or disconnected or not valued, or and those things still apply to students today. So Notre Dame just has a long way to go. And that's how I feel.
Thank you, Rochelle. Iris, you were in a unique position as head of the Office of Minority Affairs. How many years, by the way?
28.
Okay, so you have a perspective. Could you address some of those questions that I posed to you?
Sure, gladly. I think, as I said a couple of months ago, in regard to the culture of the institution, unfortunately, things have changed, but not changed significantly enough to make it a more inclusive and welcoming place for our underrepresented students, and specifically our Black students. As I came through the graduate program, I had no Black instructors. So consequently, mine came, and my first one when I was in kindergarten, and then the next time when I was in college, undergraduate. And so I knew what our students were experiencing because I felt that same way. And so really tried to make an environment or work on making an environment that was more welcoming. And as Tanya talked about, Rochelle talked about her experience with Tanya. Tanya came and talked to me. And so, you know, recent graduate, you know, student alum, and having them to come in and automatically educate my colleagues and peers about their perspective, their language. I even had a supervisor, God rest her soul, who was the "you people" thing, but not in a negative way, but I had to educate her, she and my assistant director, about how that was offensive when she made reference to "you people," because she was saying how we should work with, you know, working with the underrepresented students, because she was there with the suffer and the whole 9 yards. And so how we could help navigate that on the administrative side, as well as serving as a liaison. But it's the same thing when the students did the Black Lives Rally in July. And, I'm so glad to hear the athletes getting a voice, because unfortunately that was not the case that was happening in the 1990s or the 2000s. And I did have a chance to establish relationships with some of the athletes, and I knew that they were trying to get involved and try to be integrated into the community, but as long as they kept them separate, that became a more divisive, not a divisive, but separate. So in essence, you don't strengthen because they had power. And I just remember, Zeke, you may have been there when Spike Lee came and challenged Mickey Waters, and that was right before I started working there, about the power of athletes and how they could really help shift the tide in the institution and the culture. But Notre Dame athletes weren't at that point. They weren't in that mindset. And I'm not going to say some of the things that students would say about that, why they recruited at the places that they did. But I know right now that there are some athletes who are very involved in social justice pieces at their high schools. And so consequently, they're bringing that and finding a way to utilize that at the institution itself. So that's some of the current shifts that I'm seeing. I'm not there to be part of it, but because of COVID, I'm glad I'm not there.
Right. Well, as Azikiwe, Iris mentioned Suffer. Tell us about Suffer. Students United for Respect. You were a great leader during that period of time. What do you think has to happen to Notre Dame to correct some of these issues that were brought up in the Young Alumni Petition?
I think it really just has to be a lot less lip service. I mean, when it's all said and done, and I can't say that I'm familiar with the petition.
Okay.
I do know, like I received the emails then when they were talking about the listening session. And so I think I found the Young Alumni group and wrote something on there asking, if any of the Young Alumni felt that anything had changed based on, from how it was when we were there. And I think their responses were, no, it's just a different year, but we're still asking for the same stuff. We're still trying to fight for the same stuff. So I feel like Notre Dame knows what to do. They've got numerous reports. So the way Suffer came about, part of it had to do with Ken Durgans, who was the director of the Office of Minority Affairs before Iris. And we felt like he wasn't getting the support that he needed, and that we didn't have the support that we needed. So that the school was trying to make sure that they put people in the place that they could control, but not people who would respond to our needs. And so that was part of what was going on. But so Fred wasn't my roommate. He was the vice president of the student body, my sophomore year. And we were real close. And so in addition, so when we figured out what was going on, he made me part of his cabinet. And so they had a 1980 report on diversity at Notre Dame that came up with a list of suggestions. These are the things that you should do to make the minority experience on campus better.
Yeah.
And when we looked at it, I think it was 91, because it was right before I went abroad. So we're looking at it in 91, over 10 years later, and none of those things have been implemented.
Wow.
So now, we come up with a new student government report to say, yeah, do these things. Suffer comes about to be the other prong of that. So, okay, maybe the university thinks that, these student government reports are just reports and nobody really cares about that. But we as students say, no, we do care about this. Is important to us. We don't have a place to gather. We can't go to, I was an architecture major, so it was very difficult for me to attend Black history classes, anything that had to do with African-American studies, because they were cross-referenced and you had to be in this department, et cetera. Most of the faculty, African-American faculty, weren't tenured. They were fighting for tenure, but weren't being tenured. So the demands that we came up with as Suffer echoed those same recommendations that had been made 11 years prior. And I would wager that it's some of the same stuff that the students now are still fighting against. I'm glad to hear that the athletes are stepping up, because I don't know if you remember when we took over the administration building, it was on a game weekend. And what I wanted to do, I didn't know enough of the athletes to be able to try to pitch this, and I didn't know them well enough if I had, but that was the whole idea, is they're not gonna kick us all out on a game weekend. Like, we can stay here as long. And one of the problems was, I mean, you mentioned me as one of the leaders, but we were deliberate about not having a leader because we didn't want anybody to be put behind the 8 ball, pinpointed, and get expelled and not be the end of the movement. So we called ourselves a coalition, and there were many of us that were part of it. But one of the problems with that was when we were sitting there, you know, and when we had taken over the admin building, you know, it came out to a vote. Okay, what are we gonna do now? And everybody starts talking about it. Well, they're gonna kick us all out and I can't get expelled. And who am I? I can't tell anybody to get expelled. All that money Notre Dame costs. So, you know, people have said they were on the phone with Jesse Jackson and they talked to this person and that person. And so we ended up leaving the building. And I felt that we lost a lot in that particular moment. I felt like the community heard us. But had we stayed and forced them to kick us out on a game Sunday, on a game Saturday, I think that would have made a bigger splash, but who knows? I mean, we can't write all that. But one of the things that I was hoping for, and in athletes now, what I love about this moment, I hope it's going on the college campus too, but what I love about this moment is the agency that so many Black people have, whether they be athletes or entertainers. People are waking up and saying, no, we have to use our platforms better. And so, you know, LeBron James and these kind of cats who are saying, no, we're not playing today. I'm going to build a school because, you know, school is more important than basketball. That's not my legacy. Like, I'm loving folks standing up in that way. And I felt like the Notre Dame players could have done that as well. If they said, you know what, we ain't playing this weekend, that would have made some changes. But again, I don't know them. I didn't know them. I didn't know their struggles, their fights, and I couldn't ask them to do such a thing. But I'm glad to know that folks are taking action now and speaking up in different ways.
All right, thank you. Now, Owen, you have the platform. What do you want to tell the current students?
College is a hustle, get out. No, I'm playing on. What do I want to tell them? Whenever I have tough questions on Zoom, I like to pretend like it got frozen, like.
Our resident comedian.
I thought he was saying do the time.
Hey, I mean, I feel like Notre Dame, in all honesty, is basically like a microcosm of the world they're going to step into.
Yep.
The industry that I work in, I'm in Hollywood. Iris, you don't notice, I just got a job. I'm the new showrunner for The Last OG on TBS. So that's a big deal.
Congrats, brother.
Thank you, man. It's not a lot of Black showrunners. They made me jump through a lot of insane hoops to get this gig, but I'm very grateful and excited. You know, and you know, I have a strong support system that helped me not get mad whenever I was like, that's a racist request. Why they going, you know, like, and just help me see like the bigger picture and to push through and to get this opportunity. So I have this opportunity. So now what I want to say with this narrative is, you know, would be some messaging that I would like for these Notre Dame students, you know, to hear and to understand. So what I feel like, I worked in admissions when I was at Notre Dame because I was curious as to why we kept capping out at 2%. As far as population wise, and like, how did that work mathematically? I was intrigued by, and where did they recruit to get, you know, Black students? Because I wrote a letter to Notre Dame. And so then Notre Dame sent me an application, but Notre Dame would never have checked for me had I not done that. But I knew that there were so many talented people who looked like me in my neighborhood that could have also, you know, benefited from that experience. I bought some comedians out who had never come, you know, that far west before. And just seeing them experience it, it's all about access. It's so many things that Notre Dame could do, but who has time to like tell them? It's like, these are 4 years, man. Just get through these 4 years. And it's like, cause it's like when I would go watch football games, go back, they would let me stand on the field and I would see like the children of the coaching staff on the field and go, my goodness, like, look at this access these young kids have. And they realizing that there are more jobs to be had in the world of football than just being on the field. And they're they're watching plays being called and camera people work, and they have this access to all of this. Hey, Gabby, what's up, Gabby? Hey! So, but I mean, but it's, to me, it's just all about access, right? So if you're on campus and you are passionate about trying to make change, try to do it, because you're going to be doing that locally. Hopefully you'll be doing that locally in the community you live in, where those changes really do matter. Like, use Notre Dame as practice, because all those people you're in school with, they probably didn't have a Black teacher. So they probably don't believe you when you're telling them something, because they may not have grown up, having, they may have come from areas where they just didn't have, Black folks in their community, and that's pretty much the common narrative that we're going through. That's been happening. We're saying stuff's happening to us, and people of power just don't believe us, and we keep getting into this. So I would say just use it as practice, because it's a very small fraction of what you're going to encounter, probably. Because in Hollywood, it's like they want to hire more of us, but they don't follow through with it. Just bringing more Black people on campus won't be enough. You have to add some Black angels to the church, so that when I go to worship, I don't feel like there's not a space in heaven for me. You should have some Black art, some brown art, in random places, and not just paraded out in February when you're told, it should be just a more organic, you go, hey man, oh, I belong here. They're aware of my existence, but that's just not that place. And so you could spend your time and energy trying to change that. But I wouldn't. I would. You're gonna make friends that you're gonna have for life. I'm so grateful for that. It was the first time, I say it in my essay, it was the first time I was even though we were small in numbers, every Black person on that campus, we all were raised with a similar value system. It's the first time I was around a bunch of code switchers. Like, we all know how to talk to white folks, and we all know how to talk to our people. And it was just great to basically fellowship with that community. And the other thing that I loved about Black folks at Notre Dame is I rarely found other Black folks with the same work ethic. Like, we when you're at Notre Dame, you kind of already see this. It's like this constant obstacle that you're gonna have to overcome. So you're already, if they say no, you're already like, what's next? Like, I'm determined to do this thing. So when I got out into Hollywood, I would try to go, hey man, let's make this film. And it wasn't like the same. It wasn't like if I had all Notre Dame people with me, we'd have just done it, And so, but then that was a challenge to me. Like, how do I get that out of people who didn't, go to Notre Dame? So I would say you can try to change it, but I would say really study it, because that is sadly, that is how a lot of systems operate and are built, and try to figure out, how you can, I don't know, man. It's a tough call, because I love what Zeke. I mean, because I reached out to some athletes who played at Notre Dame back when I did. I said, hey man, why don't y'all write a letter to Lou Holtz and let him know that his narrative is very hurtful to a lot of people he built his career off of. Like, what did he say when he came to your homes and recruited you and got your trust and talked to your families? And then for him to sit here and then just be blindly saying this stuff, can't y'all call him? You don't have to go on Twitter, you don't have to go on a public platform, but can you call him and let him know that, hey man, it's a little blind spot over here. Like, what you're saying just doesn't connect. And they were afraid to do it. They were like, hey man, just being associated with him helps my, my current career, and I don't want to jeopardize that. And okay, I understand that, but it's like, I don't know. It's things of that nature. Like I don't know.
Thanks.
I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Owen. Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody. We have to wrap up. This has been a great conversation. I'm grateful to all of you for participating, and I hope this shared read will bring some enlightenment to everybody in the Notre Dame community. Y'all take care. Thanks a lot.